Hello my friends and welcome to my launch video of ANNO 117, the latest entry in the strategy, simulation, city building hybrid series that we're going to be taking a bit of a journey through today. From its earliest beginnings as a low-key 2D strategy game in the 1990s, ANNO has surprisingly retained a lot of what made it unique over the last 25 years or so. In fact, you might be surprised about how similar its first outings are compared to this newest release. I know I certainly was, as someone who had never touched those earlier games before. Before we go any further, you should know that this video is sponsored by Ubisoft. In fact, it's actually the second video I've made in partnership with them, coinciding with the launch of ANNO 117. But don't worry, you don't have to have seen the first one for this to make sense. Alongside our trip through history, I'll be getting you up to speed on 117 in regards to its gameplay, release details, my impressions of the game, and what you can expect if you decide to pick it up for yourself when it launches in just a couple of days from now on November 13th. Feel free to click around the timeline to the particular section that you are interested in, otherwise just sit back and relax as we start with a trip through ANNO's history. The series started back in the late 90s, created by independent Austrian development studio Max Design. In 1992, they released a game called 1869, nice, which, while not that ANNO-like in terms of gameplay, does feature a few things that would persist into the series that would start 6 years after it, such as ships, a focus on diplomacy, trade, and exploration, including having titles that are extremely poor for modern search engine optimization without having a word there to anchor it. Which, thankfully, they added with ANNO 1602. Anno, if you didn't know, means year in Latin, and in fact the game was actually released in the US as 1602 AD, as it was thought that American audiences would resonate more with the AD designation rather than the word Anno. AD, of course, standing for Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. This actually features in the game's intro too, funnily enough.
Do as I have done. Seek out and settle new lands, as I once did, in the year of our Lord, 1602.
Anyway, ANNO 1602 introduced a lot of the concepts that we are very familiar with today with the ANNO series, like its focus on trade, discovery, and city building. You would colonize islands, build supply chains, and keep your population happy. And also, fucking cyclist, he's staring at me. While also fighting on land and sea, something that was removed from later ANNO games, but has subsequently been reintroduced with ANNO 117. Having been released in 1998, 3D graphics were practically non-existent, and so ANNO 1602 featured simple but charming 2D sprites, which honestly hold up pretty well, especially on a nice modern 4K monitor. You can actually play all of these classic ANNO games on Ubisoft Connect as the History Editions, which aren't fully fledged remakes, but they are solid technical remasters that add high resolution monitor support, among other things. I had a very easy time running them all, with no technical issues to speak of, which is always really nice for games of this age. And if you just want to take them for a spin, a month of Ubisoft Plus will give you access to all the classic ANNO games that your heart will desire. Oh, and you get 117 too. Not bad. Putting 1602 and 117 side by side, the graphical leap is quite obviously astounding. It's been 27 years after all. But it's also kind of shocking how much the bones have remained the same. An early game island in both games looks remarkably similar. 4 years after 1602, Max Design would release ANNO 1503, a game that expanded on the original in basically every way. Gameplay was deeper and more complex, combat was more fleshed out, and the graphics were vastly improved and arguably represented the peak of what 2D sprite-based visuals had to offer. And we can see those classic ANNO bones starting to form more and more, with larger cities and more complicated supply chains. However, this would be the last game created by Max Design, and the series would move on to be developed by a new developer creatively named Related Designs, under the same publisher that had worked on the first two Anno games. The first game that would come from this new venture was Anno 1701, released in 2006, and it was a tentpole release for a number of reasons. Most apparent is that we've now entered the world of 3D, and this is really where the advances in graphical technology can be seen so drastically. Putting this alongside 117 is just unfair, which is of course no surprise. I think the most striking improvement we've made to visuals over the past decade or so is in the lighting technology, and also just the sheer poly counts we can push nowadays with modern engines. I dare say we're reaching the point where I'm not sure how much better something like 117 can realistically look. Like, I think the game could get more realistic, sure, but Anno has always been slightly stylized to some extent, and it would definitely lose some of its charm if realism began to be the only thing that we were striving for. Another thing Anno 1701 added was the series' now iconic 3D characters, in the form of other governors, parties, and adversaries you'll meet while you play. I won't lie, I did get a bit of a jump scare here booting into this for the first time, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't charming. And Annoholic is a pretty funny name too. Good job. The last historical game that we will look at today followed up 1701, and that game of course was Anno 1404, released 3 years later in 2009. And for those who didn't know any better, me, it is kind of surprising to see how close of a time period all of these original Anno games were set in. Like, think about it. 4 games, 11 years and 2 developers, and the gap between the oldest and newest games chronologically was less than 300 years. And maybe that sounds like a lot, but considering now, with 117 going back as far as it does, and 2205 being the one farthest in the future, we've now got like an almost 2100 year delta, which is pretty cool. It really also puts into perspective how much of a game changer Anno 2070 would have been when it released 2 years after 1404 in 2011. Goated game, by the way. While only releasing 3 years after 1701, 1404 made a pretty substantial graphical leap forward. Lighting had been massively improved, models and textures had shed their early 2000s vibe, and water, basically the series' most iconic element, was leagues better. Like, this water looks very nice. I'd actually never played any of these earlier games until making this video, but 1404 reminds me a lot of 2070 visually, which I guess makes sense considering how short of a gap there was between them. Even though Anno 117 is set like 1300 years before 1404, in a way it feels like we're going home, kind of. After 1404 released, we obviously spent quite a lot of time well into the future, and even though Anno 1800 is still historical, it feels quite distinct from the original 4 games thanks to its placement in the industrial age, whereas all the earlier games feature wooden ships and old-timey vibes. Even though Anno 1701 is, less than 100 years before Anno 1800. You get what I mean, right? Old-timey vibe, wooden ships, makes sense. Alright, so with that, let's settle into the modern day and see what Anno 117 is really all about. And by modern day, I mean because it's right now. The game's coming out right now. Anno 117 is not modern day, it is in fact set a long time ago. So what's obviously a first for the series is that Anno 117 is set in the Roman time period, which is something that Anno fans have been asking for a very long time. Booting into the game, you can play 2 ways. There's the campaign and sandbox, or as they call it, endless. For the former, you can play single player or up to 4-player co-op. For the latter, you can also play 4-player co-op, and there's also options there for competitive multiplayer with other people taking control of the other island's governors. Or you can do a mix of both, which is great to see. Ubisoft has put quite a focus on the campaign here, and it shows, featuring cutscenes, tons of voiced characters and voiced lines, and many opportunities to learn how the game works. I'd recommend basically everyone playing 117 take the campaign for a spin, even if you're a veteran, at least to start with, but especially if you're new, because it's a fantastic way to ease into the game's myriad of systems. One of the big things here is the game's two unique provinces, Latium and Albion. They're pretty different to each other, and I like how the campaign handles it in particular, giving you a good while to get used to Latium before moving you out to the much harsher lands of Albion. In Sandbox, or Endless as the game calls it, you can choose to start in either, along with messing with a ton of other difficulty options at the same time. And as you progress through, you'll be able to expand into the other province and swap between them at will. But you might be wondering, what makes Albion different? Well, random person that I have made up just so I can segue into the next part of the script, I am very glad you asked. Albion is based in Celtic mythology, and you can see how far away it is geographically on the world map, which also leads me to think that there may even be more provinces to come in the future, with expansions and DLCs. ANNO 1800 had like 6 years of DLCs, so I'd be surprised if it wasn't going to be similar here as well. Being based so far from the Empire, you've got an entirely unique line of civilians to progress through, as well as unique resources and the associated buildings that go along with them. As you progress, you get the choice to distinguish your settlements here even more, choosing to either merge into a Roman-Celtic hybrid, or stick with Celts only. What makes Albion different in terms of city building is its landscapes. Islands here feature expansive marshlands, which limits your building options for your settlements. You will need to harvest resources from these marshes though, and building roads on them requires both wood and money, rather than just money. So even just existing here requires more resources than on Latium. Plus you're going to have to deal with Celtic raiders and things like that, and they can be fairly aggressive at times. Having these provinces is a great way to add variety to the game, and I love that they went the whole way with unique civilians and building tech trees, rather than just reusing what we already had and plopping them in a new location. I have enjoyed my time with ANNO 117 quite a lot, more than I expected, I think. ANNO has been a series that I like to revisit every now and then, ever since I put about 100 hours into ANNO 2070 in the end of my high school days in 2011. But with life getting so busy nowadays, I wasn't entirely sure I would have been able to get around to playing ANNO 117. So when Ubisoft got into my DMs asking to collab, I was pretty happy about it, and I am so glad they did. Because ANNO 117 is an awesome game. I've really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to be playing more of it as soon as I get this video done and out the door. And if you like the look of it, then it releases very soon, the 13th of November, which is in fact just 2 days away from when this video launches. And I'll put up a guide on screen now to show you exactly when the game goes live wherever you are in the world. Perhaps what I've enjoyed most though is actually making this video. Going back and playing all these classic ANNO games has been really interesting to see, and I personally was really surprised in how similar a lot of the stuff is, even with that first entry, 1602, back in 1998. It's always great to see a series this old still have solid releases after so long. And yeah. I don't really know how I'm going to end this video. So yeah, I might just finish it here.